So my name is Thomas Kearins. I am a professional wrestling referee and have been for about 15 years. I think in October of this year. I've been working in the office for ICW for the last decade and recently became Director of Communications for the company.
So we'll get into being a Director of Operations and Director of Communications even, But we'll start off with being a referee. There's an art to being a wrestling referee.
Yep.
What did you come in wanting to be a wrestler and change to a referee, or was it always, were you focused on how was your journey of becoming a professional?
So I think like everybody else, I watched wrestling. For me, it was The Rock, and I was like, I want to be this guy. At the time, I think when I started training, I was like 12 years old, and so I was no age to start training. Done it for a few years, was doing my exams at school. In Scotland, you get like your prelims before at the time your standard grades. And because of that, my mum was like, right, I think your schoolwork's going to take priority here. I'd just get braces. So she was like, there's no way you're going to mess your teeth up after getting braces for the last year. And so because I had made friends at wrestling and I was obviously still very young, a way of sticking about was to referee the training matches. So started doing that. In no way was it my goal necessarily to become a referee. But it strangely kind of morphed into this crazy thing where it went from, I would referee a few training matches on a Thursday night to then you help out at one of the local shows and then you start to do one of the bigger shows. And then, within 10 years, you're refereeing the biggest independent professional wrestling show in the UK in 3 decades.
Yeah. I mean, that must have been a pretty crazy feeling, like being there and doing that.
Very much so, yeah. At that point in time, I had worked with a few sort of big names, like from WWE, who had maybe been released or something like that. Similar to, like, if you see the local wrestling poster and it's a photo of someone from their WWE tenure and it's like 20 years old. But at that particular point in time, when we were running the first Hydro, Mick Foley was going to be the commissioner. But because of his obligation to WWE at the time, because he was the Raw GM, I think it was, he was taken for Survivor Series. And because of that, WWE, as a way of making up to, is basically said, well, Finn Balor's on the injured list, but he can step in because we know that you were intending to have Mick. This is our way of making it up to you. So, as apologies go, I think it's probably the best one I've seen so far.
Yeah. Thinking of WWE, you refereed in NXT, didn't you?
I refereed the inaugural NXT match actually and show. It was a dark match, the first one in the NXT UK ring, so that's a proud moment for me. So it was a kind of tryout the first weekend of the shows. So it was like they filmed like 4 or 5 episodes over 2 days, and at that point in time, I think they were trying out a bunch of different British referees. At the time, I think I was like the tallest one. The roster were substantially shorter compared to their American counterpart. And because I'm naturally quite a tall person, I think they were quite happy to go with the smaller refs at that point in time.
There's a lot of that in WWE anyway, isn't there? Where they get the backstage announcers spreading their legs apart, getting shorter.
And I think I was kidding myself on for a while that I could try and make myself look any smaller than I already am. Like, I'm a tall guy, there's no hiding that. But I think the way that wrestling's moving at this point in time, like, you're seeing so many people from diverse backgrounds coming in and refereeing. Like, for example, you've got people like Jess Carr, who was the first female to referee a WWE title match recently. So, yeah, I mean, there's constantly people breaking that glass ceiling, so... by no means is being tall the biggest obstacle anybody's had to overcome, but it was an incredible experience. Got to work under Shawn Michaels for the weekend, and it was the first Scottish referee to work for WWE, so very cool.
How different is that experience then from going from like the ICW shows, which are obviously in big arenas and all that, but to that kind of WWE style, from like a production standpoint, from like a backstage standpoint? Just how different was it?
I assume a lot of the same people though, I would assume.
Yeah. Funnily enough, it was like, it's strange because you're basically working towards this thing for years where you think when you get to it, it's going to be your first day at a new school. But like I knew everyone bar the WWE sort of production team, and of course like your Shawn Michaels and your Matt Blooms and people like that. But Johnny Saint, for example, is someone who at the time was the GM of NXT UK and refereed Johnny Saint matches. Johnny Moss, who was also an agent, I'd worked with Johnny Moss for years before that as well. So with the exception of 1 or 2 people who, for obvious reasons, I hadn't come across, Yeah, I knew most of the people in the locker room, so it actually helped put my mind at ease rather than you're going in blind. Like, I don't know anybody here, and you're gonna have to try and make some new friends in the lunchroom. But it was quite comforting in that way. In terms of how it's run backstage and stuff like that, like it's. If you watch any of these 24 documentaries, you'll see like it's almost like they've got their way of setting up their backstage area, so everything's labelled, you know, exactly what rooms for what thing. Like, for example, it could be like what would normally look like a cupboard at the end of the hall that says, you know, masseuse or something like that. Like, they use all the spaces, the hairdresser, the makeup artist, and all that sort of stuff. So it's as professional as you can imagine it is. But the good thing about working in ICW for so many years is, because we'd had so many people from WWE who either were coming back to an independent show level, for example, your Drew McIntyre's in 2014, I would say, they were able to share a lot of the sort of tips of here's how to run this production better. And then we've also had a lot of people move up. So a lot of the stuff that we do from a production standpoint and generally just an operational standpoint reflects a lot of those same best practices that you would see in companies like WWE.
And obviously now we're in this new era of ICW, with the management changeover at the beginning of this year and kind of the year previous and building up to this. So have you noticed a change in ICW over the past kind of 6 months now? Like maybe like kind of going more generally, going a bit back, like
no, absolutely. I think it's not. We've gone through since the sort of boom period of British wrestling. It's almost changed almost week to week. So myself, Lee Gregg, Scot and Adam Kyle are now the 4 key stakeholders of ICW. Duncan Gray is now the owner after Mark Dallas stepped away. So now for us it's kind of about how can we pay tribute to the brand that Mark Dallas built, but taking it forward with our vision in mind. So you're going to see a lot of different things in ICW. Like, for example, normally, for better or worse in the past, we've maybe brought an entire Scottish roster to a show in Newcastle, whereas the Proofs in the Pudding is the biggest pre-sale that we've ever had in this city tonight, and 2 or 3 matches feature predominantly, if not completely, southern wrestlers who aren't always necessarily featured in ICW programming. So it's kind of about opening our mind to the people that are in the area and stuff like that, working more collaboratively with other talents and companies that maybe over the last 5 to 10 years we didn't necessarily do as much as we probably should have or liked. Because it can be quite easy, especially the run that ICW was on, to be, for lack of a better term, closed-minded, but you know, things are working, so you almost don't feel the need to look elsewhere. Whereas with us, we were like, right, how can we really put a stamp on this? Well, one of them was, we've got an inbox full of pro wrestlers wanting booked every week, so let's have a look and let's actually make the moves to make it happen.
Yeah, so you're obviously Director of Communications now, that's your role. What is that like, beyond kind of speaking to people like us and dealing with that, and then beyond kind of what does that entail on a day-to-day basis? Yeah,
so breaking it down to what I would do if I went into the office on a Monday morning. So media outreach is obviously a massive thing. Like, for example, today I think we've got another 2 outlets coming in to speak to people after yourselves. Day-to-day sort of managing the digital channels, so like your social media, all that sort of stuff, dealing with sponsors, anything sort of forward-facing from a sort of comms point of view, so like press releases and all that sort of stuff as well. Anything where we've got to communicate a message to any of our external stakeholders and internal as well.
Yeah, so kind of going on from that then, so you've played a variety of different roles before this one, kind of beyond you just doing the referee backstage. Talk about what that was like, maybe doing that for, because that was during the boom period, if I'm not mistaken.
So I'm 29 just now. So when I started in ICW, I stupidly waited until I was 18 to ask if I could come, because I thought you need to be 18 or over to get into a club. And at that particular point in time, I think they were sneaking Noam Dar into the back door, and he was like 16. And I thought I was being good waiting to ask. So hit 18, started refereeing for ICW. At that point in time, I was studying a comms and advertising degree at City of Glasgow College. So I asked Mark if I could come along and just help, like really basic stuff at that point in time. Like, for example, they'd never distributed a press release. short of being asked by media, nobody had really sought those opportunities. So that was just something. Whilst I was in college, I was like, oh, well, if I come in, maybe I can start to do this stuff. And it grew arms and legs. Was at university, and while I was studying to get my degree in marketing at UWA in Paisley in Scotland, that is when we kind of started to do the first hydro and the second hydro. And by the third, I'd been fully graduated, had a full-time marketing role elsewhere, and then was running my freelance business on the side with ICW as my biggest client. So it really grew arms and legs. And yeah, this year, now announced as the Director of Comms for ICW, whilst maintaining a schedule as a referee and running my business as a freelancer. So
busy.
Very busy.
Yeah. So, we're obviously asking everyone this, as I'm sure you've heard when you were listening to the reviews. That moment you mentioned The Rock. Was that the key for you when you were a kid, or like what was there any kind of moments, or like certain? What kind of era would it have been for you?
So I remember The Rock. That must have been when I was like 5.
Sure.
Because my mum's got like a picture of me in front of. I don't know what the correlation is here, a Bart Simpson poster, but I'm wearing the sunglasses and I've just got them down and I've got my eyebrow raised, so I'm like, right, that was about that time. I think at that point it was maybe on Sky, and I feel like maybe the only time I ever saw it was if my mum went to her friends and I was getting dragged along with her because she wouldn't leave me in the house on my own. And so I would watch it on her friend's Sky, but it was just in passing. So I knew this cool guy with the eyebrow raised and the character that The Rock was. And then I kind of didn't bother with it again because I wasn't exposed to it. And when I was in primary school, I feel like I started hanging about my wee pal Michael. Michael Feeney was his name. Shout out to Michael Feeney if you're listening. That's a name I've not said in about 17 years. But at the time, he was a massive wrestling fan, the kind of pal that if you went round to his house on a Sunday afternoon, all the wrestling figures were out. He had all the rings and all that sort of stuff, the DVDs piled high. And so I started watching at that point in time. He'd just got the DVD of WrestleMania 20. And I remember seeing the vignettes for The Undertaker coming back. At the time, I think, to wrestle Kane. And so that was kind of the first time that I saw wrestling in a context where I could say, what is this? And I actually started to understand it. And then, of all people, especially for someone of my height, Rey Mysterio caught my attention because I was like, this is the coolest guy ever. He's basically a real-life superhero flying through the air and doing all these things, but he's cool because he's got tattoos and he's Mexican, and it's like, as a kid, you're kind of looking for these people to hold on a pedestal. And I never really watched football or any other sports or anything, so I didn't really idolise any sports stars. And then I saw somebody like Rey Mysterio, and I was like, this is the coolest guy ever, and I was hooked from then.
I wonder what the first ever wrestling show that you attended was, and what had stuck with you from that.
The first wrestling show I attended was the WWE Survivor Series tour, I want to say, in 2006 in Braehead Arena in Glasgow, or just outside of Glasgow. And the opening match was CM Punk versus Mike Knox with Kelly in his corner. And sorry, do you know what? I tell a lie, actually. That wasn't the opening match, that was match 2, because I tell everybody the opening match was Paul London and Brian Kendrick defending their WWE tag team titles. And then almost 10 years to the day, I was the referee for Paul London and Brian Kendrick winning the ICW tag team titles in Newcastle. So it was like this full circle moment. And it's one of those things, like, my mum doesn't care about wrestling, but things like that, I text her and I was like, oh, by the way, this is cool. Remember the guys we went to see in the wrestling? And like at that point in time, it was such a huge thing because she bought the tickets, and it was like, it's expensive for families to go to WWE. So that was one of the only times she managed to get tickets for us. And I think since that show, I've worked with like 7 out of the 15 people that were on the card. And ironically, I always tried to get tickets to see Rey Mysterio, never managed to see him live, and now I've worked with him more than I've watched him at a show. So yeah, I actually said to him when I first refereed him in Dundee for a promotion that was, strangely, didn't really have any history, but managed to get a TV deal where it streamed live on 5 Spike from Dundee Ice Arena. And the main event was Rey Mysterio versus John Morrison for the title. And I said to him at the time, I was like, by the way, this is actually quite cool because I could never get tickets to see you. And this is the first time I'm seeing you whilst I'm introducing you as a peer as opposed to a fan.
Yeah.
Which is one of the most unnerving things ever. I don't really know how to explain it.
Bit of a mindfuck.
Yeah, it's almost like somebody that plays Sunday League meeting like Ronaldo.
Yeah.
And being like, oh, how you doing, mate? Like, I'm going to referee this match. Does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah.
Whilst, by the way, like, again, not wearing the mask, so you're almost like, should I even be, like, should I turn away? It's like this really awkward thing. So yeah, crazy.
So, obviously you've been with ICW throughout those 20, we mentioned like that boom period. Obviously the business kind of, British wrestling generally kind of slowed down. We had to talk about that from how that kind of come about, because you've had a few different factors, obviously, and I mean, obviously naturally when there's a boom, there's a fall. That's how the economy works. But then beyond that, you had the speaking out movement, you had WWE coming in, which some people say benefited, some people very much don't, and wide varies. And then obviously the big one being the pandemic.
Yeah.
So what was that like from a backstage perspective? Was that difficult?
Yeah, so it's strange because, again, it's like bittersweet, and I've said this in other interviews, but ICW was kind of, it built its name off of that edgy over 18s, anything can happen, like you're going out for a pint with your mates, like there were plenty of stag do's and hen do's in the crowd and stuff like that, and it was very much a night out as opposed to a wrestling show. WWE, when we signed the deal to stream on their network, by no means put, like, and I've said this in another interview, as I say, it's not that they had a black and white piece of paper that said, these are the things that you cannot do. But I think just because we were a wee company from Glasgow that started with 40 people in a community hall, managed to build our way up to running the biggest indie show of the last 30 years in the UK, I think out of sheer fear, we were like, let's just play this safe. It's almost like Madagascar penguin meme, you're kind of just like, yeah, like just act normal or act casual, whatever it is. Like, yeah, just don't give the game away. You're almost waiting for somebody to be like, by the way, like, we made a mistake. It's not actually you that WWE want to sign. So when it happens, you're almost like on cloud nine. So for us, it was never a negative. Whereas I think some people were like, oh, you're being censored too much. You're this, you're that. I think it's just a sign of the times as well. Like any broadcast deal, if you're signed to a particular channel, there's always going to be small changes there. But we still did your King of Insanity matches. There was still no DQ for a long time. We still leaned into a lot of those adult themes. But there were clearly enough changes there that the public perception did slightly change. And we did lose viewers because of certain things. But with that, we also gained a ton from especially overseas. So that was a massive win for us. Speaking out movement, of course, brought its own challenges. That's, we've been on record there and said that it's incredibly important to listen to any accusations that are made. Just now our concern is just making sure that ICW is a safe place to be for both the wrestlers and the fans coming to watch. COVID is almost like this continuous queue of waiting to punch in the gut. COVID was crazy because by that point we had signed the WWE deal and it had been sat there for, I think we had provided them with footage for up to, I think it was like 2 years by that point. We couldn't say anything because it hadn't been announced. Then they decided to launch during COVID. So now the challenge there is we're launching ICW on the WWE network, but we can't provide any new content. So they're launching with a show that happened the year previous. So you're kind of like, oh, this is challenging. And then thankfully, because of the sort of implications for sporting companies and like, we were able to class ourselves as like an entertainment company. Because of that, you get certain allowances during COVID, like you could record or you could like do performances as long as it was in a closed set. And so similar to TV shows and film, we were able to do closed door shows in our studio, which is the home of ICW currently. It's called the Asylum. It's also where Glasgow Pro Wrestling Asylum originated. And we produced, I want to say, upwards of 100 episodes from a Tedesco tile warehouse originally at the top of Glasgow city centre that was converted because its sole purpose was to produce television content for the WWE network. Thankfully, we've managed to build on and benefit off of that since, because it was kind of like bare bones at that point in time, but now it's got everything. It's got all the light and the screens and like your bleachers and all that sort of stuff. It is a totally fully functioning studio that we're able to kind of take on the road with us. Like you'll see tonight, the screens that we're using are taken and moved to whatever venue we're going to. So it's really cool. We can kind of take the look of ICW wherever we're going now. So yeah, at the time, massive challenges logistically, but now like it's almost like we're benefiting from the fact that we put in the legwork when we had to, and now we can kind of take the show on the road and bring ICW to people around the UK.
Nice one, mate. That's bang on, mate.